cloth hung over the mirror, a sheet hid the bed, a huge fan of white paper filled the fireplace. Constantia timidly put out her hand. She almost expected a snowflake to fall. Josephine felt a queer tingling in her nose, as if her nose was freezing. Then a cab clop-clopped over the cobbles below, and the quiet seemed to shake into little pieces. "I had better pull up a blind," said Josephine bravely. "Yes, it might be a good idea," whispered Constantia. They only gave the blind a touch, but it flew up and the cord flew after, rolling round the blind stick, and the little tassel tapped as if trying to get free. That was too much for Constantia. "Don't you think we might put it off for another day?" she whispered. "Why?" snapped Josephine, feeling, as usual, much better now that she knew for certain that Constantia was terrified. "It's got to be done." "But I do wish you wouldn't whisper, Con." "I didn't know I was whispering," whispered Constantia. "And why do you keep staring at the bed?" said Josephine, raising her voice almost defiantly. "There's nothing on the bed." "Oh, Jug, don't say so," said poor Connie. "At any rate, not so loudly." Josephine felt herself that she had gone too far. She took a wide swerve over to the chest of drawers, put out her hand, but quickly drew it back again. "Connie!" she gasped, and she wheeled round and leaned with her back against the chest of drawers. "Oh, Jug, what?" Josephine could only glare. She had the most extraordinary feeling that she had just escaped something simply awful. But how could she explain to Constantia that father was in the chest of drawers? He was in the top drawer with his handkerchiefs and neckties, or in the next with his shirts and pyjamas, or in the lowest of all with his suits. He was watching there, hidden away, just behind the door handle, ready to spring. She pulled a funny old-fashioned face at Constantia, just as she used to in the old days when she was going to cry. "I can't open," she nearly wailed. "No, don't, Jug," whispered Constantia earnestly. "It's much better not to. Don't let's open anything. At any rate, not for a long time." "But it seems so weak," said Josephine, breaking down. "But why not be weak for once, Jug?" argued Constantia, whispering quite fiercely. "If it is weak," and her pale stare flew from the locked writing table, so safe, to the huge glittering wardrobe, and she began to breathe in a queer, panting way. "Why shouldn't we be weak for once in our lives, Jug? It's quite excusable. Let's be weak. Be weak, Jug. It's much nicer to be weak than to be strong." And then she did one of those amazingly bold things that she'd done about twice before in their lives. She marched over to the wardrobe, turned the key, and took it out of the lock. Took it out of the lock and held it up to Josephine, showing Josephine by her extraordinary smile that she knew what she'd done. She'd risked deliberately father being in there among his overcoats. If the huge wardrobe had lurched forward, had crushed down on Constantia, Josephine wouldn't have been surprised. On the contrary, she would have thought it the only suitable thing to happen. But nothing happened. Only the room seemed quieter than ever, and the bigger flakes of cold air fell on Josephine's shoulders and knees. She began to shiver. "Come, Jug," said Constantia, still with that awful callous smile, and Josephine followed just as she had that last time, when Constantia had pushed Benny into the round pond. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7. But the strain told on them when they were back in the dining room. They sat down, very shaky, and looked at each other. "I don't feel I can settle to anything," said Josephine, "until I've had something. Do you think we could ask Kate for 2 cups of hot water?" "I really don't see why we shouldn't," said Constantia carefully. She was quite normal again. "I won't ring. I'll go to the kitchen door and ask her." "Yes, do," said Josephine, sinking down into a chair. "Tell her just 2 cups, Con, nothing else, on a tray." "She needn't even put the jug on, need she?" said Constantia, as though Kate might very well complain if the jug had been there. "Oh, no, certainly not. The jug's not at all necessary. She can pour it direct out of the kettle," cried Josephine, feeling that would be a labour saving indeed. Their cold lips quivered at the greenish brims. Josephine curved her small red hands round the cup. Constantia sat up and blew on the wavy steam, making it flutter from one side to the other. "Speaking of Benny," said Josephine, and though Benny hadn't been mentioned, Constantia immediately looked as though he had. "He'll expect us to send him something of father's, of course. But it's so difficult to know what to send to Ceylon." "You mean things get unstuck so on the voyage?" murmured Constantia. "No, lost," said Josephine sharply. "You know there's no post, only runners." Both paused to watch a black man in white linen drawers running through the pale fields for dear life, with a large brown paper parcel in his hands. Josephine's black man was tiny. He scurried along glistening like an ant. But there was something blind and tireless about Constantia's tall, thin fellow which made him, she decided, a very unpleasant person indeed. On the veranda, dressed all in white and wearing a cork helmet, stood Benny. His right hand shook up and down, as father's did when he was impatient. And behind him, not in the least interested, sat Hilda, the unknown sister-in-law. She swung in a cane rocker and flicked over the leaves of the Tatler. "I think his watch would be the most suitable present," said Josephine. Constantia looked up. She seemed surprised. "Oh, would you trust a gold watch to a native?" "But of course I'd disguise it," said Josephine. "No one would know it was a watch." She liked the idea of having to make a parcel such a curious shape that no one could possibly guess what it was. She even thought for a moment of hiding the watch in a narrow cardboard corset box that she'd kept by her for a long time, waiting for it to come in for something. It was such beautiful, firm cardboard. But no, it wouldn't be appropriate for this occasion. It had lettering on it. Medium, women's 28, extra firm busks. It would be almost too much of a surprise for Benny to open that and find father's watch inside. "And of course it isn't as though it would be going ticking, I mean," said Constantia, who was still thinking of the native love of jewellery. "At least," she added, "it would be very strange if after all that time it was." Chapter 8. Josephine made no reply. She had flown off on one of her tangents. She had suddenly thought of Cyril. Wasn't it more usual for the only grandson to have the watch? And then dear Cyril was so appreciative, and a gold watch meant so much to a young man. Benny, in all probability, had quite got out of the habit of watches. Men so seldom wore waistcoats in those hot climates, whereas Cyril in London wore them from year's end to a year's end. And it would be so nice for her and Constantia, when he came to tea, to know it was there. "I see you've got on grandfather's watch, Cyril." It would be somehow so satisfactory. Dear boy, what a blow his sweet, sympathetic little note had been. Of course they quite understood, but it was most unfortunate. "It would have been such a point, having him," said Josephine. "He would have enjoyed it so," said Constantia, not thinking what she was saying. However, as soon as he got back he was coming to tea with his aunties. Cyril to tea was one of their rare treats. Now,